Welcome to Talkin SEC. Writer, photographer, and producer Phillip Jordan discusses the latest news and breaks down the biggest games with the best analyst around. Now, from Southeast Alabama, a state that knows its sports, here is Phillip Jordan.
What's up, y'all? Talking SEC is back. It's been 2 months since the last episode of the podcast. I am Phillip Jordan from Last Word on College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I am the in-studio host and producer for Dothan Wolves Football. You can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. Of course, podcast is on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. And if you are on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. And joining me on this return episode of Talking SEC, a voice you've heard many times here on the podcast, Brandon Eisenman. You can check his work over at the LSU Wire, and whenever he decides to get behind the mic and record another podcast, you can check him out on the LSU Breakdown podcast. Brandon, it is always good to hear your voice and talk to you on the show, and you have the honor of being the first guest of the return. Talking SEC, how's it going, man?
Yeah, Phillip, it's going good. I'm glad to be back on with you. It's been a little while since I've been on with you, but, we're getting close to the season. There's a lot of news that we got to go through, and, I'm honored to be the first guest back on Talkin SEC.
Yeah, and I explained in a little teaser I did. I'm switching the host to SoundCloud to Anchor, which you've used Anchor in the past. So I'm very interested in seeing how that goes as well. But yeah, as of this recording, we are recording this on Tuesday night. Of course, this podcast dropped on Wednesday. 25 days away from the SEC football season starting. We were kind of talking about this off the air. We're going into Labor Day weekend. This is not what we're used to on Labor Day weekend, obviously, with everything going on in the world. We would have some big matchups this weekend. There is some college football being played with the Sun Belt, Conference USA, those other conferences. But it is good, and we got some games coming on, so we're looking ahead. Hopefully everything goes to schedule with college football, but it is an exciting time with SEC football right around the corner, and no better time, I think, than to get this podcast going again. Now, something I wanted to bring you on to talk about, though, with the LSU Tigers, it's not a lot of guys are back from this team. We knew that when we talked back in the spring and in early summer, but LSU's had some opt-outs here in the past weeks, especially with Jamar Chase, and then, of course, with Tyler Shelvin as well. So that's some pretty big question and some holes that have to be filled for the LSU Tigers.
Yeah, certainly, Phillip. That we kind of knew on Sunday when the report came out from Tennessee over from CBS that Chase was, going to opt out, which is a really, really big blow for the LSU offense because, first of all, you're replacing Joe Burrow at quarterback with a redshirt junior Miles Brennan, and now your top target that would have been your potential top target and the Biletnikoff Award winner from last year, and Chase is opting out to prepare for the draft. So you only have two returning players that started in the national championship game on the offensive side of the ball for LSU, and that's wide receiver Terrace Marshall, who's now going to be the top target for Miles Brennan in the passing game, and then offensive lineman Austin Deculus. And then over on the defensive side of the ball, you've had Kerry Vincent opt out. You've had Tyler Shelvin opt out, like you just mentioned. Neil Farrell has also opted out. Justin Thomas and T.K. McClendon have both entered the transfer portal. Those guys specifically were supposed to be the starting defensive end, so now the coaches have to find guys to replace them. And a couple of weeks before the season, where we're at right now, this is really a big blow because LSU's probably almost done with camp, and now you've got to rework all of your guys in. And to add to all of the mess that has already happened over the last couple of weeks, a couple of the offensive linemen, or several of them rather, were quarantined because of COVID concerns. So those guys weren't practicing for a little while, and the offensive line's going to have to be really, really good this year to protect Brennan in the pocket. But the Chase situation, Phillip, and I'll just talk on this for just a second. I don't want to take too long, but it's probably the worst opt-out of them all for LSU. It's the biggest blow up to this point because he was going to be your main guy on the outside to be able to throw to. And, yeah, Marshall is great, but Chase was in elite company with winning the Biletnikoff last year, so now you lose him. And it's just going to look a little different without Chase on the field. Now the number 7 is also voided, and I wouldn't expect anybody to wear that number this year.
Yeah, and with Chase not being there, if he was there, that was going to open up stuff for Marshall and the tight ends and other receivers and other players on the team, because he is going to garner double teams. You know that. You're going to build your defense around, okay, where is Jamar Chase? We have to make sure you can't take him out of a game, a talent receiver like that, but try to limit his touches, which will open up things for other guys. So now you look at Marshall, he's now going to be the focal point of the receiving core now. So now when you look at what they have behind him, who's that next guy you see that's got to or will step up, be that number 2 receiver for LSU?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be Racey McMath. McMath is a guy that has played limited roles at LSU, but he's so versatile in open space that he's going to be able to take that potential at the opposite end of the sideline on the outside, opposite of Marshall, and just be able to run with it. He's a very good receiver. He had 17 receptions for only 285 yards last season with 3 touchdowns, but he did average 16.8 yards per catch. And obviously you would have to think those numbers will increase this year. And then at the third receiver spot, most likely in the slot, you could have Trey Palmer, you could have DeRay Jenkins, John Trey Kirkland, or either of the 2 freshman guys that have been highly talked about, Kayshawn Boyd and Coy Moore. So look, the depth at wide receiver is there for LSU, but obviously losing Chase is a big blow, but I think they're going to be fine at wide receiver even without, a guy that had 84 receptions for 1,780 yards last year and 20 touchdowns. So even though you lose that big production and that big-bodied receiver in Chase, I think they'll still find a way to make it work.
And on the defensive side, with Tyler Shelvin decided, and I think me and you talked a lot about him a while back when I had you on to do the LSU preview for the season, when I was previewing every team for the SEC each week. Now, I was doing some reading and some research. Glenn Logan, a guy that was going to be, or was last year more on the, as a defensive end, a pass rusher, he is moving into that defensive tackle spot. So is he the guy you're seeing that could take over for Shelvin on the starting of the defensive line?
Yeah, I certainly do. And, you know, the opt-out from Shelvin is kind of an odd situation, too, because he was really expected to take on a much bigger role this year, obviously, on the defensive line. But I think his weight was kind of a concern, because I think he was at like 370, 380 pounds, something like that. And Ogeron wanted him down to like 330 to be able to better prepare himself for the draft, you know, as the season went along. Now, I don't think him, you know, having to, or Ogeron wanting him to lose that weight had anything to do with him opting out. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you lose such a talented guy there. But LSU has depth at every single position to be able to replace anybody that gets hurt, opts out, transfers, whatever the case may be. And we've seen that come into play as they added Jabril Cox to the transfer portal linebacker to replace Patrick Queen and Jacob Phillips, who they lost to the draft. They just keep reloading on every single position, that they have so much depth that they're going to make this work one way or another. But the defensive line for LSU is going to be a really interesting aspect of the entire team to watch as the season unfolds.
You know, when you look at both players with Chase and Shelvin, with Jamar Chase, he's a guy, honestly, if you look at it just from individual standpoint, not the LSU as a team, for him, honestly, he could hurt himself draft stock by playing more than anything. I mean, him opting out, I mean, he, to me, should be the first receiver taken in the 2021 NFL draft. With Shelvin, he's a potential first-round pick, but, I mean, I don't think that's a lock. So I was kind of shocked that he decided to do this. I mean, if it's about COVID-19, look, respect that decision. But if you're doing it, if you think you're going to be a first-round pick, I don't agree with it from that side of it. I think with him, if he could play, and if it's not COVID-related, that maybe he should have try to play to increase that draft stock because, reading some reports on him, he's got the talent, but maybe it's not completely refined talent. So he was the one I will say was shocking that maybe he should be playing if it's just when you look at just from the standpoint of increasing and bettering your draft position.
Yeah, certainly. I 100% agree with that. He is a potential first-round pick, like you just stated, but it's certainly not a lock. I really didn't see him opting out because of all the buzz and the hype that was around Shelvin, that he was going to be, this immaculate and great defensive lineman for LSU in 2020. And when I found out he was opting out, I was like, well, that's kind of a head-scratcher because, he's supposed to be one of the top players on the defensive side of the ball, and now you lose that. But I think he should have stayed to increase the potential lock for, a first-round pick. But he decided to opt out, so they'll just have to replace him. But look, Shelvin was going to be a guy that could have had, anywhere from 7, 9, 10, 11 sacks on his own in the season, and then you have to find another player to produce those numbers.
So let's look at LSU schedule-wise. Of course, that's changed a lot since we last talked because it was still the normal 12-game schedule. You gave me your expectations for that schedule record-wise, but now look at it, it's a 10-game schedule. I mean, you talked about a little bit of this off the air as well. Overall, LSU schedule, did you have any issues or anything where teams were placed or anything like that?
Oh, yes. Really just one minor problem with this, okay? So, as we all know, LSU played at Vanderbilt last September. I think it was the very last game of September. They won 63-38, I believe the score was. And when the schedule got released a few weeks ago when they were playing at Vanderbilt, I was like, why? Like, why would the SEC make LSU travel to the same place they played last year? Like, they could have played it at home and played at Missouri. Now, I'm not saying I don't like the two other cross-divisional matchups in Missouri and Vanderbilt because I do. I think those are both very easily winnable games that LSU should win. But I just have I just have an issue with playing at Vanderbilt again, and I really can't explain why, but I just don't really see their logic in making LSU travel back to Nashville again when they could have just, played that game at Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I know. Me and you were talking about schedule. I mean, first you start off with Mississippi State, and look, Mike Leach is probably preparing something crazy for that just because it's Mike Leach. And he's going to have something up his sleeve for the very first game because he knows going into that game they're going to be the underdog. I mean, currently right now, LSU sits at a 19-point favorite in that game, which will be a 2:30 Central Time on CBS on the first week of SEC football. But then you got at Vandy in Missouri. So, okay, you get by Mississippi State, which you should. They should go 3-0 to start. Then you have at Florida, South Carolina, at Auburn, and you're off. Then, of course, Alabama. And then you close it with at Arkansas, A&M, and then Ole Miss. When you look at that schedule, what are some? I guess I should say it like this: what are your expectations now for this team's record with that 10-game schedule, where these teams are placed?
Yeah, I think they can go 8-2 or 9-1. Look, the three toughest games on this schedule are at Florida, at Auburn, and home against Alabama. Simple and easy. Now, A&M, obviously, it's a tough game, and if they can put up the numbers that LSU did last year, like Kellen Mond said they can, then, yeah, I might add that one into the mix. But LSU and Florida is always a really good game. Auburn has been close the last 2 or 3 years, and they just beat Alabama for the first time in 8 years last year. So that's going to be a really big game, and that one's at 5 o'clock. And CBS considers 5 o'clock prime time, I guess. But I really think 8-2 or 9-1 is where they're going to finish. They could finish with 3 losses if they slip up at A&M, or maybe even at home in the season finale against Ole Miss. But I see either 1 or 2 losses for them this year, just given on, even on what they've lost, player and talent-wise over the last couple of weeks. I still think they're either an 8 or 9 win team.
Okay, so when I look at the schedule, and I didn't tell you what I was going to say before we recorded because I didn't, want to lose my guess before we got started. But I will say I'm going to go 7-3. Florida, Auburn, Alabama. I just going to say this, and of course everybody knows I write about Auburn every last word, but I think Auburn's due in this series. Just kind of the last 3 years have really not gone their way. They've all been close. I think the combined margin of victory for LSU the last 3 years is 7 points. Of course, you had the 2 back-to-back years where Auburn blew double-digit leads over LSU. Then last year, Auburn lost 23-20 in that game as well. So that's why I'm going to lean Auburn there. And Alabama, look, the Auburn fans and maybe every SEC fan listening to this right now is not going to like what I'm about to say. I think Alabama's going to win the conference. Won their schedule. I mean, bless their hearts. They get to open against Missouri, then they get to close at Arkansas. I mean, might as well give them off weeks to open and to close the season. Mac Jones may not even need to play in those games. So that's a big part for me with Alabama. And where they have everything. They've got Auburn at home. I mean, yes, they go to Baton Rouge against LSU, which fan-wise, that's probably, that's not going to be the same thing as a normal year. They get Georgia at home. That's early in the year. Georgia will still be figuring things out. And look, A&M for me is like Tennessee over the knees. I'm not buying this Texas A&M hype. They've been a 7-5, 8-4 team under Jimbo Fisher. The exact same thing they were under Kevin Sumlin. I believe they have talent over there, but until you actually show that you can, be more than a middle of the pack SEC West team, I'm not going to buy it. It's just the way I feel about it. So when I look at Alabama, that's kind of where I'm leaning in the conference overall. I think Alabama's going to win the whole conference, in my opinion.
Oh, okay. Look, I'm okay with the 7-3. You said off air that might make me upset. That doesn't, because they could easily lose 3 games.
But you know what? If this was, not to cut you off, but if this was a normal year, you add 2 more games in there, they're probably a 9-3, 10-3 football team. So that's actually, it's 7-3 to probably, if you hear 7, that sounds bad probably for any college football fan that's used to their team winning 9 or 10. But if you look at it in the scope, this is a 10-game season. I think that's a pretty solid record after everything they've lost from opt-outs and from last year's team. So, okay, this is just me stating as a guy that's just looking at the conference as a whole. 9-3, 10-3, if we had a normal year, would be a good year with everybody you've lost. And then going into next season, that would give you a lot of momentum. But I guess that's kind of the way I look at it with LSU. But, you can sorry for cutting you off, but you can continue now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, so like you said, 7-3 would be a good record, given the circumstances that it's only a 10-game season. Now, back to the Alabama winning the conference thing, Phillip, I just want to point out one thing right here, okay? I believe the last time we talked, and I could be wrong here, so correct me if I am, but I think I picked Florida to win the conference, which I'm still picking because I like Florida to be just a surprise team for everybody this year. Now, I can see Alabama winning it. I think it's going to be Bama and Florida in the SEC championship game, which could really go either way. But I think Florida's just going to have that final push in the title game to pull it off. And one other thing here while we're talking about the schedule, too. So if LSU does go 7-3, 8-2, 9-1, whatever, CBS Sports has been playing Appalachian State in the Outback Bowl. I'd love to see that matchup, too. I really think that would be good. But they're going to have to do better than 7-3, I think, to have that matchup there. But I could definitely see them losing 3. I really can. I think it's possible, just given, even what they've lost. They're going to have good talent. But this season really depends on Miles Brennan and how he plays at quarterback. That's everything for LSU this year.
Look, my thing with Florida, and I think Florida will win the SEC East. My pecking order this season with that is Florida, Georgia, Kentucky. I do not think Tennessee is the third best team in the East. I think it is Kentucky. And speaking of Auburn, I do think Kentucky is going to give them a game to open up the season because Auburn's breaking in 4 new offensive linemen, a new offensive coordinator, Chad Morris, which we'll see. We know how that song next goes with Gus Malzahn, who's calling the plays, who isn't. And then defensively, Auburn's got to replace. They have experienced players coming in that played last year, but they are replacing pretty much their whole secondary and then replacing Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson on defensive line. That game, if Auburn don't come in with the heads right, and with Auburn crowd not going to be what people are used to, only 20%, that is a dangerous game for Auburn. So that's why I'm big on Kentucky with what they got coming back. But my issue with Florida versus Alabama is this. Florida last year could not run the ball. They were a really good passing team. But if you go against Alabama, especially that late in the year, and Alabama's going to get rolling, they're going to have some things figured out too. Because I know last year defensively they struggled. But I just feel like if Florida cannot run the ball, if they have the same issues they had last season with that, Alabama is not a team you want to be one-dimensional against. And that's why I have to give the edge over Alabama over Florida.
Hey, that's not a bad explanation there. And I do want to add one more thing too, Phillip. You were talking about, maybe the reduced capacity of a crowd. You take that into account with these big games like LSU at Florida, LSU at Auburn, Alabama at LSU, even go to Athens like for a Georgia home game or College Station for an A&M home game. I really think the lack of a full stadium is going to help better benefit these away teams because you're not going to have all that ruckus crowd. Now they might implement fake crowd noise or however they have to do it, but I don't think it'll be the same as having 102,000 people in the stadium cheering against you if you're the away team. So I think that could be one big advantage that we could see a lot this year, not only in the SEC but in all of the conferences that are playing, is the reduced capacity of crowds.
Yeah, that's really going to negate a lot of stuff because, a lot of times, especially in college football, the crowd can decide a game if it's close. I mean, who's got that advantage with the crowd? I mean, I would say kind of going back to Auburn, the game at Florida last year. I think the crowd impacted that one with Bo Nix. If that crowd is negated, that game is probably different than it was. Same thing last year with the LSU Auburn game. There's plenty of instances where you can think of even last season where, there's only 20% of the crowd there. That negates a lot of things and actually evens things out and helps out the lesser teams going on the road this year. So it is going to be interesting from that standpoint. And when we look at college football as a whole going into this season, of course, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are not playing. Well, we know the Pac-12 pretty much isn't playing. Who knows what's going on with the Big Ten? I don't even think they know what's going on over there. Nebraska parents suing the conference. There's no like agreement or working together. It seems like with the Big Ten, a lot of arguing. But anyways, so I think we set up good for the SEC. To be honest with you, I think there will be two teams in the SEC from the SEC getting into the college football playoffs. So I'm going to go and give you mine, and I threw this one on you last minute before we got recording. I think Alabama and Florida get in. So everybody's saying I'm trashing on Florida. I think Florida will get to the college football playoff despite not winning the SEC. I think Oklahoma's going to win the Big 12. And then Clemson wins the ACC. But Notre Dame is probably going to give them – I think Notre Dame will give them a better game than they gave them 2 years ago in the playoff. Notre Dame is their biggest challenger in the ACC. That is very chalk, but those are the four teams I see playing in the college football playoff. As I spring that topic on you last minute, do you have a four teams you could see getting there?
All right, so I've got three. I'm kind of going back and forth on the other one in my head. So I'm going to go with Clemson, obviously. I'm going to go with Florida. I'm going to go with, you know what, I put Alabama in there. I thought about putting LSU in there, but I'll go with Bama just because they're likely going to win the SEC West. And then number four, actually, Phillip, I think this is about to really shock you, probably make you fall out of your chair. I'm going to go with Oklahoma State. And the reason I'm going with Oklahoma State is I think they have the best returning offense in college football. You've got arguably the best running back in college football in Chuba Hubbard. I'm not really sure who the quarterback is, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be good. And, man, Mike Gundy and that Oklahoma State team, if they can get past Oklahoma and Texas, I think they can ride the wave the rest of the way and make it to the playoff for the first time ever. Now, that would be a real big shocker, but I like Oklahoma State. Oklahoma's right there.
I don't hate that pick. I thought you was going to go with Texas or something like that. Texas is the same thing I feel about a bunch of schools. Prove it to me on the field that you're back or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't discount that. And look, Gundy's probably due to finally knock off Oklahoma. And look, Oklahoma is doing something this season that they haven't had to do lately under Lincoln Riley. They've, you go through Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts. Those were all players with the experience coming in. I mean, it's a completely different deal with what they got coming at quarterback this upcoming season. So I could see that. The Big 12 is kind of, that's the question mark. And unless the Big 10 just changes ideas and does decide to play. I know the Thanksgiving thing's been talked about, and who knows what Big 10 is doing. If they miraculously decide to play, then that does change things with Ohio State and Penn State. But they're not playing as far as we know, so it is interesting how that's going to work. And that's where we're going to have a big discussion if we make it through this entire season with those three, and of course the other conferences that are playing this fall as well from the group of five. Asterisk. I think a team should be proud of that championship. You're the teams that have played. You won the championship that year. So I really hate that asterisk thing, but that's going to be a big conversation as well. And then if the Big 10 and Pac-12 do play in spring, which is a stupid idea that's not going to work, but if they did, I don't know. It's going to be interesting in how people feel about this year's champion if we make it all the way through in the fall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, certainly. And, another thing that I'll hit on really quickly before we move on is the fact that all of these Big Ten teams, and I think maybe one or two Pac-12 teams, were ranked in the preseason AP Top 25 poll. So if the poll comes out next week, if it does, because I don't think we have any ranked teams playing this weekend, but once the ACC starts next weekend on the 12th, it should come out on the 14th or the 15th. I think we'll see all of those Big Ten, Pac-12 teams fall out, and you'll have a ton of Group of Five and, the three Power Five conferences that are playing. You'll have all those teams, shoot up into the rankings because the Big Ten and the Pac-12 aren't playing. And then if we do make it through the season and go to the playoffs, you're going to have the Big Ten and the Pac-12 upset because, they're not playing, they can't get a team in. Well, it was your decision not to play, so you can't really whine about it, but you're probably going to do it anyway.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting getting through this, and it's kind of like the season opening is layered because we had the game we got this past week with the FCS teams, with Austin Peay and Central Arkansas. And this week, of course, you're getting games like South Alabama at Southern Miss, Arkansas State, Memphis, BYU at Navy. Then the following week, the ACC and the Big 12, they'll start playing. And then you'll have on the 26th, the SEC gets their season going. So it's a build up till we get to everybody playing. Hopefully, of course, everything could change. But lastly, before we get out of here, we got a few more minutes before we hit the 30-minute mark. I just want to ask you, what in the world is going on with your Jaguars? Because I do believe this has the stench, the feeling of a team trying to be bad on purpose to get either Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence.
Phillip, I might go into a rage with what we're fixing to talk about. No, I'm just kidding. But
it is a family show. Just remember that.
I mean, worst franchise, worst front office in all of professional sports and all of sports, really. Look, okay. So you trade away Jalen Ramsey last season. You trade away Calais Campbell to the Ravens. You just sent Yannick Ngakoue to the Vikings because he was holding out because he didn't want to play because you wouldn't give him enough money. And then on top of that, you waived Leonard Fournette, released him, whatever you want to call it. I'm more upset about the Fournette release, waive, whatever, because, and here's the thing, and I won't talk about this too long, but so the Jags drafted him number 4 overall in 2017. We all know that. He rushed for over 1,000 yards his rookie season. They go to the AFC Championship game where they got screwed against the Patriots. And 2018 was a little bit of a down year. 2019, he still ran over 1,000 yards, even with his off-the-field issues. Look, he was benched for a game because of his attitude. He got arrested in 2019 for something. I mean, the list just goes on and on. His off-the-field issues, but it seemed as if he was getting it together, finally starting to realize that he needs to focus solely on football and not the outside world stuff. And then before the draft this past April, the Jags tried to trade him. They couldn't get any takers, so they kept him on their team. And then you decide to release him in the middle of camp. That is what makes no sense to me, because sure, you have 8-year vet Chris Thompson now likely going to be your starting running back, but why wouldn't you just let Fournette play out this season and become a free agent, because you already voided his guarantee and you declined his 5th-year option for next year, so he would have become a free agent regardless of if he played or not. Probably the stupidest decision ever made by the Jaguars front office.
Yeah, I guess for me, I just see all this stuff going on, and I know Fournette had said some things during here in the off season about quarterback. I think he had even talked about they would want to go after Cam Newton, and also at the same time, I was reading some stuff on ESPN that they even tried to trade him. They didn't really get any takers, which I don't believe they wouldn't have got any takers. Maybe they just didn't get what you wanted in return. But it's just with everybody they have let go, and a handful, even if that players are remaining from the 2017 team that almost got to the Super Bowl against a blew out lead against the Patriots. It just feels like this team is trying to be bad on purpose, which asked the Jets and the Dolphins the last couple of years. They've tried that. It didn't work. It's hard to tank in football. It's not like basketball. But it just feels like they are trying to be bad on purpose to potentially get either Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, which is a slap in the face of Gardner Minshew, because he played really well last year, and I really hope he's able to ball out this year to really make them make a tough decision.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, Minshew threw for over, I think it was 1,200 yards, or 2,500 yards rather, in 12 games last year, while Nick Foles was injured. So even if they tank, which that's thinking that every fan in the NFL has, is that, hey, the Jaguars are going to go like 1-15, 2-14 just to go get Trevor Lawrence at number 1 next year, which is a very real possibility. But I don't think that is the mindset of the team, is to purposely tank just to go get Trevor Lawrence when you have a solid quarterback in Minshew that needs to, play all 16 games this regular season, evaluate him each game, and then in the offseason, decide whether you want to trade up if you finish with, say, more than 5 wins, or if you tank, go take Lawrence at number 1 overall anyway. So I think they need to ride it out with Minshew here. I just don't really see their logic being tank for Trevor, if you want to call it that. But the front office for the Jaguars makes really, really dumb decisions. They've been doing that for years, and honestly, man, I think everyone in the front office needs to get fired. But that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with them how it looks, because this is SEC college football podcast, but NFL season is coming here pretty quickly too, so it'll be interesting with Jacksonville and all that, what they do, and all these things. Really, it's going to be interesting because draft positioning. Yeah, if that is what they're doing, I just don't think that works in football, trying to tank anyways. But we'll see. And college football's here, NFL is right around the corner, so football season here. High school football is being played here in the state of Alabama, so a lot of football being played. It's just different. But anyways, Brandon, I do appreciate you coming on the return episode of Talking SEC, and I always appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. And if listeners want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @Eisenman_7. You can also find my hopefully soon restored LSU Breakdown podcast over on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, and Spreaker.com. And Phillip, one more thing I want to add really, really quickly before we go with Fournette. So my thinking is he's going to get signed by the New England Patriots, run behind Cam Newton for 1,500, 2,000 yards, and the Patriots are going to go back to the Super Bowl. That's my final thought, and good job, Dave Caldwell, on letting Fournette go.
We'll close it out of that and let people listen to have their thoughts on that. I guess they can hit me up on social media at PJordanSEC, or of course everybody, you can subscribe, rate, and review over on Apple Podcasts. So throw a review in there if you got thoughts on that comment as well. But anyways, Brandon, I do appreciate you coming on the show, and I'd like to tell everybody thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Talkin' SEC. Follow Phillip on social media at PJordanSEC and the show at Talkin' SEC Pod. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time when we're talking SEC.